Welcome to ClueCon Weekly. Join us every Wednesday to learn about the latest cutting-edge developments in the real-time communications industry. ClueCon Weekly is brought to you by FreeSWITCH Solutions. Get support and professional services directly from the creators of the FreeSWITCH open source project, solving your issues in the most efficient, stable, and scalable way possible. Get the FreeSWITCH advantage. Visit freeswitch.com. Also brought to you by ClueCon, the premier technology conference for developers by developers. Join us every summer in Chicago. ClueCon kicks off on Monday with our annual hackathon, The Coder Games, followed by 3 days of technology-rich presentations discussing telecom, WebRTC, and IoT from developers around the world. To learn more, visit ClueCon.com or call 877-74-CLUE.
And welcome to ClueCon Weekly. Today is the 12th of December, 2018. This week we're going to be joined by Mr. Mike Jarris, and he's going to be answering a lot of questions from Mr. Matt Brutus that have been submitted by the community. So stand by for that. For you guys that don't know, Mr. Jarris, Jarris has been with the FreeSWITCH project since the very beginning. He has coded tons of things in there, worked on the build system, all kinds of other fun stuff, and these days he's actually working with Anthony, the inventor of FreeSWITCH, over at SignalWire. So this guy has forgotten more than most people know about FreeSWITCH. So stand by. If you got some questions for us while he's talking, be sure you ask those on YouTube or the various other locations, and we'll get those proxied in here for you. So stand by for that. Before we go there, though, let's go and talk to Miss Abby for the news. Abby, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. Thank you for asking. Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us today on ClueCon Weekly. If you haven't heard the biggest news so far, we are now on Slack. So if you have any questions during this call for Jarris or the rest of us, you can ask us on that Slack channel. You can also ask us on traditional methods as well if you prefer. But if you'd like to join that community Slack channel, we have a channel for the community, we have a developer channel, we have SignalWire channels. So we have a lot of different channels to choose from, and I will give you the link to those in the bottom of this video. Our other biggest news is we're offering $50 in credit for all new SignalWire registrations. So if you've not signed up for a space yet, you can do that with another link that I'll provide below using the code FreeSWITCH31337. I'll put that code in the link as well. So if you're interested in joining SignalWire, now is the perfect time to test it out because we'll be giving you $50 in credit to play around. Of course, if you have any questions during this call, feel free to contact us, especially today because we are answering all questions about FreeSWITCH. So if you have something that's been bugging you, you can ask us right here and we can help you figure it out. Our next FreeSWITCH training is actually coming up tomorrow. So if you're interested in an in-depth beginner level training, you can find more info on that on our website. Again, the training is virtual and it is tomorrow, so it is not too late to sign up. If you're interested, check out our website. My favorite news of all is ClueCon is back on schedule this year. We're back August 5th through 8th. Save the date. But we're also getting a lot of new exciting things because this is our 15th anniversary, one of which being a brand new website. So we're getting a 15th anniversary web makeover. So check that out at the beginning of the new year. Also, save the date for next Wednesday because we're going to be having a very special episode of ClueCon Weekly. I'm going to be the guest, and I have a very, very special Christmas surprise for everybody. So you definitely don't want to miss that. Check us back here in 7 days. And that's all I have for the news today. Back to you, Ken.
All right. Thank you very much, Miss Abby. So we've got a lot of things going on today, and we're going to be joined by Mr. Jarris. So let's go on over and see those guys. Mike Jarris, Mike Brutus, how are you guys doing today?
Doing good.
Good. So this week we have a Community Corner special where Mike gets to answer a whole bunch of questions.
Awesome.
So, Mike, you ready for the first question?
I suppose.
Okay, so here's the first one. It's from Jamil Abdulyev. And so it says, guys, I have questions regarding to core DB. Which one is which one is a good enough approach? Using SQLite in the shim for each switch, or using shard Postgres for all instances? All switches are acting as class 4. All registers are on proxy.
Apparently, my dog loves
So,
that.
Mike, what would you do in this situation?
I never run SQLite in production ever. That being said, I've seen people push it to pretty ridiculous scaling, typically using in-memory tables and all of that. I don't recommend it. The thread safety and locking required in SQLite serializes a lot of things that real databases don't require. And as a result, the performance at any sort of scale is really badly hampered. So if I'm running anything, even single boxes, I use Postgres. I'm a Postgres fan. It just performs better when tuned properly. SQLite's in there so you can get an out-of-box experience that's really solid and just works without having to configure external things. And while you can push it pretty far, it's never really worth it. The work necessary to set it up isn't very much, and it lets you do a ton of things, including access those tables easily from outside of FreeSWITCH. So it just opens up a ton of functionality. I would, in any real production implementation, always use an external database. And for me, that would typically be Postgres, although I've certainly in the past used MySQL occasionally, Microsoft SQL,
Or OBDC.
Over ODBC, any number of things. But for me, my go-to is Postgres, and even for anything,
Well, and Postgres has a really good caching layer in FreeSWITCH as well, right?
There is a database handle cache. There's not like a database query cache. But for all the database layers, they all go through the same abstraction, and we do like batching of transactions and all that stuff. The big gotcha is SQLite will only run one transaction at a time. That's serialized, and that's not the case with any of the other databases. So anything that scales, for sure, Postgres. The only case that I would ever use SQLite personally would be in a small embedded situation where memory footprint is greatly hampered, and your CPU is pretty low, so you're never going to have enough transactions to make a difference. In those cases, embedded may make more sense, but in general, I would never use SQLite.
So it seems like Abdul has a pretty large install because he's talking about actually sharding Postgres.
Yeah, in that case, it's a no question. You should design your database infrastructure to scale properly for what you need in a way that can horizontally scale, and use it as the back end for all your boxes. The other gotcha with
and if they're sharded too, he's probably sharing them. He's probably sharing the Postgres database, and so if it's just SQLite, it's just the information is just contained on one device.
Yeah. The other thing about using SQLite in shared memory is if you're doing voicemail actually keeps a table of all of the messages, and that has to persist. So if you lose that database, all of your index for all your voicemails is gone. So I definitely wouldn't recommend doing that in shared memory because that needs to persist. Most of the other stuff in the tables can go instance to instance, but some of that stuff, even if it's transient, like let's say SIP registrations, it's really nice to handle through a reboot because still knowing active registrations is nice, even though it'll fix itself eventually. I tend to like to set it up where registrations are for a very long period of time, hours or days, with options pings and things like that, just to reduce unnecessary SIP traffic. If you don't need NAT
And so
handling, even
the reduction there is actually very substantial. It's like a 90% reduction in traffic when you start pushing out those registrations.
oh, if you're doing heavy registrations with presence, it can kill a box. Where if you switch that up and take those reg and sub times out to hours and days, everything will work just as well, and the traffic will be significantly less. We cache where we can, but there's certain things you have to do after the reg and subs, and it requires lookups. So pushing those out to not happen when they don't need to can make a huge difference on a box with a lot of endpoints, particularly with presence turned on.
Okay, so for question number 2, Grant asks, for example, if I have questions about a specific problem or looking for information on something, a silly example that I have right now, what characters are actually valid as a Sophia contact user? It doesn't seem to like any kind of symbols.
It is not true that it doesn't like any kind of symbols. Symbols that are restricted or at least problematic would include the @ sign, since that has a specific meaning in user at domain. As it turns out, him and I discussed further. As it turns out, that's what he was trying to use. And that's a problem just because of the definition of what a URI is. Restricts the use of that. Well, that separates the user side and the domain side. He was trying to have an @ sign in the user, and that's illegal. The only
You're
other
using an email address, huh?
in the user side. So that's going to be problematic. The only other character currently, although I'm about to revert this patch, that Sophia Contact doesn't like is the tilde. A patch went in that made that behave in a specific way without anyone realizing that that was going to break anyone who had a tilde in the username. I asked the original author of that patch to do something about it, and they haven't responded. So I'm going to revert their patch to fix that issue. But other than that, there should
and the tilde is very important too. So what's the representation of the tilde within like an RURI?
It should be totally fine. The patch added a special case inside of Sophia contact function. And I'm just going to revert. That was a feature they added just for them, and I'm going to revert that until they can come up with a solution that doesn't break other people. So the other thing to note is there are certain requirements as far as URL encoding that would be specific to SIP requirements. So in some cases, you do need to encode those portions of that. Those should pass through fine. Anything that follows RFC should do the right thing with those, although I can't guarantee it. But you may run into issues where you need to URL encode and decode stuff if you're pushing them directly into variables to get things to work properly. FreeSWITCH does the right thing in most cases there, I believe all cases. So,
but the best use would be just like, let's just use alphanumeric, right?
Yeah, but I mean, even UTF-8 is allowed in those things and should work properly. But if you need like let's say an @ sign in your user portion, you're going to have to URL encode that for that to function properly.
And then it's probably going to be problematic too, just passing through not just FreeSWITCH, but
yeah,
other user agents. Like, what's the interaction with phones and stuff like that, and proxies like Kamailio or OpenSIPs, and
having an @ sign in the user portion of a URI would be something that I would avoid. It's asking for trouble.
Yeah, the tilde too, though. Maybe even a colon.
No, the tilde should be fine. It's just we're broken in that regard, and we'll be fixing that shortly.
Okay, question 3.
Shoot.
Parker. Oh, actually, Parker's in the room, isn't he?
He is.
He is. Parker asks, "Hey all, I'm digging into Verdo, and I have a question regarding changing microphone and speaker devices. I can get them to change off call, but not during a call. There is a set audio playback device method, which I'm going to test if it changes the output device, utilizing an active dialogue call, but there is no function to change the input device."
All right. If I remember correctly, this question was kind of worded like it was for Verdo, but was actually in reference to the new WebRTC SDK we're releasing with SignalWire Cloud. As far as these answers go, it is general to both because it's based on the restrictions of how the browser works. So, it's essentially the same answer. It's possible we can work around it in a couple ways, but we'll discuss that. So, output device is totally changeable during a call. There's no restrictions whatsoever, and setting that will absolutely work. You can do it now as long as the client calls the right things. You can reset that during a call. The other side, changing the microphone, requires a new get user media call. So right now, Verdo doesn't support renegotiating a whole new call like that. The client code doesn't. What can be done theoretically is
Isn't it really like a security issue with the browsers too? Because you need to authorize the device and everything, and
it's probably not a security issue as far as authorization, but something in the background going and changing input devices on the fly is at least a little bit shady, potentially. Like if something remotely could go and change which input devices you have.
in the end,
Not that you
the browser
couldn't.
has to authorize
Yeah, not that isn't already all controlled by JavaScript anyway. So there's nothing they can really do about it. What can be done is you start a new get user media and swap the streams on the fly. Theoretically, the problem with that, and the reason we haven't done it yet, is that that's going to cause a blip in what you're sending, because it has to actually reset all of that, reset what you're sending, reset the media stream, renegotiate that. So there's going to be like an actual blip, like you're going to stop sending for, God, anywhere from a few hundred milliseconds to a few seconds, depending on NAT scenarios and all that. So
right. So it's got to renegotiate the SDB and everything, right?
So some of that could be done under the hood and swapped once it's back up and running. That's not a capability we have right now. It is a possibility for the future, but it's going to be a bit tricky, and there will be a blip just because of the technical requirements. There's definitely going to be a blip in the audio and video. As well as you essentially need to send from both streams at the same time to do something like that, which means you're going to have bandwidth issues on top of it. So there's all kinds of gotchas that go with doing that. It's not going to be pretty. It's not something that we have now, but we might potentially have in the future. Those are the gotchas, though.
And so a little bit before the call, you were talking about how some of this code base is changing very quickly, right? especially from the JavaScript perspective.
We do have a new SDK coming out soon for SignalWire Cloud. It is similar to Verdo underneath, but it isn't Verdo. It's kind of a new protocol designed to work with our cloud infrastructure and the scaling and clustering required to work with our cloud infrastructure. So we've done a bunch of work in regards to that to provide kind of a Verdo-like experience, but that can scale to cloud scale where you can do hundreds and hundreds of calls. So it's a big project for us.
It's really hard to keep account of all those different IP addresses, right?
Yeah, I mean we have a pretty exciting, interesting clustering system that we're building behind SignalWire Cloud. So this will be one of the first things that's exposed externally to customers that actually uses this protocol for our clustering, and it has a whole system built in that keeps track of load metrics across the cluster and deals with routing for that based on the most available node in the cluster and all those sorts of things. So it's a much different kind of problem than running Verdo on a single box.
That's for sure.
Pretty technically interesting solution we're coming up with, and a whole bunch of tools coming out along those lines. Kind of the entire concept of our cloud offerings it involves being able to massively scale and auto scale, so you don't have to worry about any of that. So we've had to build a bunch of custom tools and in code to make that happen. So it's pretty exciting to see these things starting to come out.
And enormous challenges there when you're doing it too, because doing the auto scaling is not the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah, this is something that's been a couple years in the running as far as building this technology out, and it's exciting to start to get some of the results of this out to the people and seeing it actually being used.
So Parker, are you there? Did Mike answer your question?
Yes, he certainly did. We were able to figure out some of this, especially with the help from chatting with different support people. I was happily surprised that we were able to get a good user interface just based on the functions that were available. I do feel like maybe the documentation could have had a little bit more in there, but being able to use the developer console to see like what prototype methods were on there and reading through the actual source code was really helpful. Was able to create my own little interface to update the different devices that were on there. If you're on a call, it would display a little highlight that says you can't change the current input until after the call is over. So anyways, that was really the only thing that we had to sacrifice because of that. But I totally get that there's a sort of a permissions issue and some gotchas there. But overall, it came out really well using local storage to keep the last state being reflective of if they unplug their device, it reacts to that, all using the Verdo client. So
that's really cool. It's great. It's great to hear feedback live like that.
Yeah.
Okay, Mike, you ready for the next question?
Shoot.
Number 4. Carmine, an IRC asks, "Hi, I'm trying Verdo Communicator. I installed it on the same server where it resides, FreeSWITCH. From 2 computers, I log into Verdo, but if I call a registered extension or an external number, works, not Verdo. But if I try to call from the client, Verdo, to the other, it tells me that the user is not available. Why? Can someone help?"
So this is going to be some sort of dial plan or directory issue. So the way the default dial plan works, it uses the user channel and the user endpoint goes into the directory and looks up the dial string used to find that user. Excuse me. And
So it's probably a bad dial string, right? It
yeah,
doesn't.
the way we have it in the example configs, the dial string is built up as a combination of Sophia contact and Verto contact.
And
So
that should work in that scenario.
that should work. So either someone's changed those or they're using older configs where that wasn't set up already, or there's some sort of issue with what user is actually being looked up. So one of the ways that you can figure this out is if you look through the logs, you'll see the calls to Sophia contact and Verto contact. You can see what user it's looking up. You can even write in FSCLI, use the Verto contact and Sophia contact functions to actually do those lookups manually, to get an idea of. Sorry about that. To get an idea of what users being looked up, and to go ahead and troubleshoot why it's not finding that one. So
we get this question quite often, right? I mean, this is I think it's like the second or third time that has come on. So why not tell us about endpoints and the difference between Sophia and Verto?
So Sophia is our SIP endpoint, and Verto is our custom WebRTC signaling endpoint. We have all kinds of different endpoints. I talked about the user endpoint, which is a kind of a magic proxy endpoint that does a lookup of the user to find where they are. These are all
And
different.
how does it tie into the dial string?
A dial string is essentially like a URI that points to a specific endpoint, and a specific path, say to get to that user. So depending on where you need to call to get to that user, those dial strings will be completely different. So I was talked earlier about the Sophia contact and Verto contact functions. Those look up a dial string to get to a specific user based on registration type information. Those processes are somewhat different between SIP and Verto. So exactly what happens under the hood is a little bit different, but in the end, they give you a dial string that you could say bridge to, that will get to that person based on their registration. So this is true for other endpoints as well. I'm trying to think of those are the two that people use the most. But we have others. We have the user endpoint. We have loopback, which is another kind of special endpoint. What else do we have? There is H323 support, but very few people use it. It's kind of a legacy endpoint called mod-free TDM for using hardware. In practice, I don't see a lot of people using that anymore. But there's all of these different ways that you can send a call. So those are part of how we address sending calls. The originate URLs for each endpoint start with the kind of key for that endpoint. So for Sophia SIP, mod Sophia, it's Sophia / and then some other things that are specific to that module. For Verto, it's Verto / it's a little bit different for every single one.
So in the CLI, another common question that's almost very closely related. What is the difference in the commands in the CLI to see the contacts?
To see which?
Just to see the contacts. So like, how do we see the Verto registration? How do we see the Sophia registration?
So for Sophia, it's Sophia, what is it? Show registration. God, I'm going to completely blank because I always tab complete. Sophia profile name. Show reg, I think.
Show registrations.
Yeah.
And
I
don't even know. I was playing around yesterday. I don't even know how to do it in Verto Communicator.
There is a similar one in Verto. Honestly, I can't tell you what it is off the top of my head. There's also a core registration functionality,
That is like
where the core keeps track of registration separately from each module. So you can just type show space registrations, and that'll show it in a protocol agnostic way. I believe that's only supported in SIP and Verto at this point.
Cool. Okay. Next question.
What you got?
Oh, this is the session timer ones. Okay. Vishal Dalsanya asks, I'm trying to make session timers work by adding in below internal XML, all of my external profiles. Enable timers equals true, and session timeout value equals 90. So I think here, just let's talk about session timers, because session timers are so important.
Yes, absolutely. So session timers are a SIP method for one side or the other, either a user agent client or user agent server, UAC or UAS, is responsible for keeping track of when they heard from the other side last. And if they haven't heard in that time period, to send typically a re-invite. You can also do update, but it's typically re-invite to the other side to like check in and make sure they're still there. So the reason this is important is sometimes clients die. Sometimes, let's say I'm on my cell phone and I'm making a call, and my phone dies, like my battery dies. Sometimes I lose internet connectivity because I walk away from my Wi-Fi, things like that, and because
we want to keep those firewalls primed too, right?
Yeah,
make
absolutely.
sure those ports stay open.
Absolutely, you want to make sure that there's an open NAT path between the client and the server, because otherwise, if the client can get to the server, but the server can't get to the client, and the server sends a bye message, the client's never going to get it, and they're never going to know that the call's hung up. So SIP session timers are handy for that as well. But the big thing is, if you can't talk to each other, and one of the ends dies, in the other end, let's say, is an IVR or something that isn't going to say, oh, Malvrutis isn't on the line anymore, I'm going to hang up on him. As a provider, that call could stay up forever. And if that's a billable call for your client, it's just going to never-endingly bill and stay up. And if that's a billable call to you, the same thing. So SIP session timers are important in that you want to make sure that the other end's still there and you're not, essentially still getting charged for a call that's dropped.
But these are pesky things, and they're very hard to get right. Right? Because in the end, it's probably one of the larger, reasons for drop calls that we see. Right?
I don't know if I'd say that it's hard to get right. I would say it's actually fairly easy to get right. There's a lot of misconceptions about the way you should time out things. Like everyone wants to use RTP timeouts. RTP timeouts are really a horrible way to tell if the call dropped. Because let's say you put the call on hold. some devices don't send media when the call's on hold, because why would you burn bandwidth when you don't have to? The other side isn't listening, stop sending stuff. So RTP timeouts are horrible, but like I was saying before, leaving the call with the ability to stay up forever is super dangerous. So it's nice to have some stopgap. Two things I've seen: SIP session timers is really the way I prefer. The other good method that's kind of an easy security method would be to do just an overall call timeout. No calls can last more than 4 hours. And I've seen some services that have restrictions like that where there's a limit on how long a call can last, period. So
yeah, because you don't want that call to be up forever.
Correct.
So UAC, UAS, what's the best way to go?
So it's negotiated. This is actually another misconception about SIP session timers. People will frequently say my provider doesn't support SIP session timers. Well, for once, there's a SIP spec that the spec actually makes sense. Session timers use reinvite, which is part of the original SIP specs. Everything out there is required by RC 3261 to support reinvites, which is really just invite. And if they didn't support invites, then they couldn't have set up a call in the first place. So because it's negotiated in a way that the other side, if they don't support SIP session timers, will just ignore. Here's essentially how it works. If we make an outbound call and we say, hey, we want to do session timers, let's do this refresh. The other side knows about it. They can respond and they can indicate if they want to be the refresher, the one that sends the reinvite, or if they want us to. If they don't know about it, they're just going to ignore that. And we get that back when they reply and we say, okay, I guess we're the refresher. The other guys don't know anything about it.
And that's actually UAC and UAS, right?
Yeah.
So client server.
Yeah, the client is the one that sends the initial request and the server is the one that receives it. And in the message, the header for session timers, there's a refresher equals. And let's say we send a request. We want them to be the refresher because let them deal with it. We send refresher equals UAS. If they respond without that header, then we know, okay, so they don't know anything about session timers. We're going to have to be the refresher then. If they respond saying that refresher is UAS, then we can assume that they're going to do it. If they respond saying it's UAC, then it's like, all right, I guess we're going to have to do it as well. So we always know who's responsible. It doesn't require the other side to support anything other than RFC 3261. I've repeatedly heard people say, I want to use SIP session timers, but my provider doesn't support it. It doesn't matter. If providers don't support reinvite, they are so badly broken, since it's part of one of the original RFCs and a core component. If they can't support an invite, they can't take calls. I haven't seen very many out there, and if they exist, I wouldn't use them. They are badly broken.
Cool. So Abby has a question, right? Abby pasted a question. Do you want to read it out? Or you want me to do it?
Is this the one about message from the chat? Go ahead and read it.
Yeah. Okay. So is it possible to have an in-dialogue message received on the B leg relayed to the A leg? Call flow is Cisco, OpenSIPs, FreeSWITCH Bridge, OpenSIPs B, Carrier A, And carrier A sends back a typed message in the dialog with some rate info, etc. OpenSIPs B sends back to FreeSWITCH, but then FreeSWITCH does not relay the message back through the bridge to OpenSIPs A. Is there some channel variable I can set to make this happen, or do I need to do something fancy, like listen on event socket somehow and do it manually? That's a good question.
It's a good question, and I don't remember the answer. I thought the in dialogue ones did that automatically, but I must be wrong. So I will have to go look and see if I can get an answer to that.
So, but using message is a really interesting way of exchanging information, right? So we use it for we could use it for SMS with simple messaging and stuff like that. What else is it used for?
Message type. Typically, it is one of the 3 or 4 ways to do chat-like things in SIP. Because SIP is such a lovely protocol, they came up with lots of ways to do the exact same thing. Message lets you send in dialogue or out of dialogue signaling-based chat messages, and then there's at least 2 other ways to do so that are media based, kind of negotiated in the STP. Those would be RTT and what's the other one? MSRP. And
what are those?
Those, it's interesting. The people that we've seen trying to use those tend to be trying to implement some services for text-based 911 services. So there's some requirements that came through for that. One of them, I'm trying to remember which is which, does keystroke by keystroke. So like each individual keystroke is transmitted. And the other one does kind of like a line by line type chat where it sends it all as a big chunk.
If it's keystroke, that's a lot of messages.
It is a lot of. It is a highly inefficient way to send text. That being said, text really isn't that much, anyways. So there is a good reason for it. The reason behind it is there's a certain intention that is expressed based on the way we type and a speed to get that information. In something like an emergency response situation, that sort of information being transmitted might be really important. Let's say, a deaf person is typing into a system to a 911 operator, and they're trying to, communicate about where an active shooter is or something like that. Could be really important information, and something happens and they're unable to complete what they type. That information coming real time can be the difference between life and death. So not particularly efficient, but definitely useful for very specific purposes. Also, just in communicating, going character by character allows a more flow of conversation that speaking and hearing people get real time that those with visual or hearing impairments might not be able to get. So it's just a more accessible kind of communication available to people with certain disabilities that would allow for better communication. To be able to, talk in both directions at the same time. If I can see you starting to type, I can start replying at the same time in a way that even speaking and hearing people can't communicate because they'd be talking over each other and it'd be really confusing. But real time in both directions might actually be more efficient.
That's really cool if you think about it, because you can instead of with the old school instant messengers, even some of the more more recent ones, you just see person is typing, right?
Yeah.
But to see the actual typing as it's occurring, that's a really cool concept.
Yep.
But I guess, like, if you think about it with OpenSIPs, like the thing with OpenSIPs is, I mean, it's all about the configuration. And I haven't seen a lot of OpenSIPs configurations even take message into account, unless they're specifically using them for like something, like this type of communication or for SMS or something like
I
that.
haven't heard of a whole lot that uses message. Particularly this one was about what was it about? Something with billing information.
Yeah.
I've seen that. Yeah, raid info. I've seen that in info messages more. And I know that there's a Sophia param for passing info across the bridge. I've never actually seen message used for that. It's a little bit strange, actually.
Well, and that's the power of FreeSWITCH too, because FreeSWITCH is always going to route that message, right? Whereas programmatically with OpenSIPs, you have to create a route for it, or at least take it into consideration.
Yeah, they're saying it's not. I thought that it did that. I'd have to check. There's probably a profile param that allows for that, but I'd have to go peek and double check.
So why you want to open up questions from the audience?
Sure.
Anyone out there got any questions?
Well, the question about the message type was from Jennifer Hashimoto on Slack. So we've already got that one.
Oh yeah, Jennifer.
And and then we didn't really have any questions on YouTube. We did have one question on YouTube, and I was going to filter it, but I'm going to go ahead and ask that anyway. And let me proxy it in, Mr. Jarris, and
Sure.
you can answer that. Uday Kumar asked, is there any open source call center application available for FreeSWITCH like VTDial is for another platform? And if there's not, is there any plan to make one like VTDial?
What does VTDial include? There are some. The limits of all of the systems out there that I've seen is that they scale essentially to one FreeSWITCH box. On the SignalWire cloud side, we do have some functionality already released. That's kind of a cloud scaling multi-box call queue SDK. So anything that I would build at this point, I would build off of that. And I'm trying to remember.
I think the way VTDial works is they have agents that are sitting in a conference room, and then it bridges the calls in after answer.
Right, yeah, but that's on the inbound side. VT also has a full outbound dialer in it, which is probably more like what this guy's looking for. But I don't know of any open source dialer call center platform.
On that side, no. The call center platforms that are kind of a full soup to nuts delivery that I know about is Italo, whose team did Virtual Communicator and a bunch of things like that. Their team out of Brazil has a call center platform. And then I'm going to blank on his name. Just spoke to him a couple months ago. Areski?
Yeah, Resky closed source. They're no longer updating the open source version because everybody was just taking all their code and never.
Yeah, that is the struggle with open source always. But I know their stuff is out there, and then like I said, SignalWire Cloud has a set of APIs that you could build something like that on. It is not a full service web-based call center solution, but it does solve the hardest problem for a major scalable call center solution.
I think the cool feature there when you're doing that is the AVMD stuff, right? So the answering machine, the answering machine detection, all that stuff, and that product there is really cool.
Mod AVMD is interesting, but less interesting to me than our actual ModCom AMD module. Ken can talk a little bit about that since he's very experienced with it as well. But that module's been tested across many millions and millions of calls, and our detection rates are pretty solid as far as detecting if it's a machine or a person, and we get pretty good results with that. That is a commercial module available for open source FreeSWITCH, and also will be a feature available on cloud coming soon.
Yeah, that module.
Okay, well, answers from the experts.
Yeah, so if I can interject right there, Mr. Jarrett, just talking about ModCom AMD. If you guys are looking for answer machine detection, that mixed with Mod VMD or AVMD in open source FreeSWITCH is a very, very powerful solution that gets you virtually 100% detection rate on answer machines there. But the trade-off there is ModCom AMD is probably is in the upper 90% accurate because it does speech pattern analysis. It looks for how we answer the phone versus how how we leave messages for greetings on the machine. So it works really good at that, but it doesn't catch everything. So, but when you combine that and you do that early, and if you get a detection or you don't get a detection, and then you go to AVMD, AVMD is much more CPU intensive. And I think you talked about this the other day, Jarrett, on here on ClueCon Weekly. It detects just random signal tones, and doing that in code is, well, as Jarrett said, it's hard, and so it uses a lot of CPU time. So when you combine those two, you get a good balance of CPU versus detection rates. And like you said, I know that ModCom AMD code has been used over billions of calls for everything from emergency notification to all kinds of other stuff. So if you need something like that, definitely go to freeswitch.com, look under the commercial modules, and you can find that. You can download it. The price is super reasonable. And disclaimer, I don't make any money off of that. All the money goes to back into supporting the project. So, go out there and get it because it works, and it works quite well. And I know there's stuff out there that uses it, and you can control it from ESL, you can control it from scripts, you can control it from the dial plan even. So there's all kinds of fun ways to use that and integrate that into your project. So go check it out.
And that's essential for any type of outbound call center is to have that feature. Like it's just absolutely always begin on it all, not to end up in a voicemail system.
Well, not just that, but consider, emergency notifications, or you got kids in school, you want to know when soccer practice is canceled. Just those kinds of systems is essential for that because, we've got all these systems, and it's cool if I can answer the phone and I can get the message direct, but when they go leaving it in the voicemail, they always screw that up, so they cut off the first half of the message, or you end up with a blank message because they played it before your voicemail even, you got through your voicemail greeting. So those things come in, they're really a necessary thing in that arena. However, because it can be easily abused for naughtiness, that's why it's a commercial module, guys. Plus, if you're doing that kind of volume, you can afford you can help support the project. And because guys like Jairus and Anthony and Brian, they all have mortgages, they all have internet bills, and I don't know, it takes a lot of computers to run FreeSWITCH, to run freeswitch.org. And so it helps to go fund those kind of things, guys. So also, don't forget, I'm going to get a cheap shot in real quick. There is a donate button on the freeswitch.org website or under the open source stuff. It's Christmas, guys. Go over there, throw some money in it, and buy Mike, Brian, and Tony a dinner or some beverage for Christmas. I'm sure they would appreciate it. All right, I'm going to let you guys have at it. Anything else we need to get in here today, Mr. Mavrutis, Mr. Jairus?
No, we just
Uh-oh.
We lose you?
Ken, back to you.
All right. Hey, thanks very much, Mike Jairus and Mike Mavrutis. All right, guys. Thanks very much for coming out and hanging out with us this week. A lot of good information from Mike Jairus there. Next week, join us. We're going to have Miss Abby Minasali. She's going to be joining us. She's going to be talking about some cool stuff. So come out and see that. It's going to be a special episode of ClueCon Weekly. Anyway, we'll see you guys next week. So have a good weekend.
You've been watching ClueCon Weekly. Tune in every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central. Keep up with the latest happenings by subscribing to our YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or visit us at FreeSWITCH.com.